I stole a prestigious profession from my arrogant sister and made her a laughingstock in front of our family. So, a few weeks ago, I got a text message from a number I didn't recognize at first. It just said, "Hi, it's Mom. We're having a family dinner next Sunday. Would love for you to come." For a solid minute, I just stared at it. I hadn't heard from my mother in over 8 months. No calls on my birthday, no texts on holidays, nothing. The silence wasn't new. We've had a strained relationship since college. I was always the difficult child, the one who spoke up too much, pushed back, got therapy, refused to stay quiet. Meanwhile, my younger sister Grace, perfect, golden Grace, could do no wrong. She's 3 years younger than me, but ever since we were kids, our parents acted like she was the sun and I was the cloudy day. Grace got the new clothes, the attention at school plays, the gentle explanations when she messed up. Me? I got grounded for a B+. If I showed emotions, I was too sensitive. If I didn't, I was cold. I can't even count the number of times I was told I was exhausting or dramatic or just too much. Anyway, that text hit me like a truck. I stared at it, trying to decide if it was bait or some kind of cosmic mistake. I finally saved the number to double-check. It was her. My mother. The woman who once told me therapy was a waste of money and maybe I just needed to be nicer to people. For context, I'm 33 now, a financial analyst in Boston. I live alone. I make decent money. I've built a life I can be proud of, even if it doesn't involve weekly calls home or Sunday roasts at the family table. It's not that I cut them off, exactly. I just stopped trying. After so many years of pushing for a place at the table and being told, silently and not so silently, that I didn't belong, I just stopped asking. So that text? It messed with my head. I screenshotted it and sent it to my best friend, Harper, who responded with, "LOL, what fresh hell is this?" Which, yeah, pretty much summed up how I felt. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit there in my messages like a ghost. But curiosity, or maybe some deep, wounded part of me that still wanted to be seen, got the better of me. I replied, "Sure. What time?" She responded almost instantly. "Dinner's at 6. Bring a dessert if you'd like. Grace and Matthew will be there too." Matthew is Grace's husband. They got married 2 years ago in a vineyard ceremony I wasn't invited to. I found out about it from Instagram. Everyone was there, cousins, aunts, my parents, even family friends I hadn't seen in years. Everyone except me. So yeah, I said yes to dinner. Against all logic, against every self-preserving instinct I've cultivated over the years, I said yes. I even made brownies, real ones, with brown butter and sea salt flakes, not the boxed kind. The house looked the same. White siding, trimmed hedges, the old wind chime by the porch that I swear has been tangled since 2006. My mom opened the door and gave me this tight smile, the kind that stretches but never quite reaches the eyes. "Alexia," she said, like she was tasting the name for the first time. "You look good." I just nodded. "You too." Inside, Grace and Matthew were already seated in the living room, laughing about something on his phone. Grace looked up and gave me a half-hearted wave. "Hey, Lex." Lex. I hate when she calls me that. Dinner was fine. Surface-level talk. My job, Grace's dog, my dad's back pain. No one mentioned the years of silence. No one asked why I hadn't come to Thanksgiving or why I stopped sending birthday cards. No one brought up the wedding. At one point, Grace started talking about how hard it was to find a good nanny, and my mom said, "You wouldn't understand, Alexia, but once you have kids." I didn't even let her finish. I laughed. I just laughed, right there at the table. It wasn't funny, not really, but something about the way she said it, the assumption, the condescension, just snapped something in me. "You're right," I said. "I wouldn't understand. I've been too busy being the family disappointment to worry about childcare." It got real quiet after that. Grace cleared her throat. My dad muttered something about passing the salt. My mom blinked like she didn't know whether to scold me or cry. We finished dinner in awkward silence. No one touched the brownies. I took the whole tray home. When I got back to my apartment, I sat on my couch and tried to figure out what the hell just happened. Was it a peace offering? A guilt trip? A power play? Maybe all three. Maybe none. But the weirdest part? Despite everything, despite the old wounds and the new ones, I didn't regret going. It didn't fix anything. It didn't answer any questions. But it reminded me of something I forget sometimes. I survived them. I made it out. And I'm still here. The driveway looked smaller than I remembered. The cracks in the concrete were deeper, a little more stubborn, like everything else in that house. I parked my car a few houses down, just in case anyone looked out the window. I didn't want them seeing the upgraded model, or the clean exterior, or anything else that might hint that my life had turned out okay. That wasn't the version of me they were expecting. I dressed deliberately for this. Faded jeans that clung too tightly around the knees, a gray zip-up hoodie I'd had since grad school, and scuffed sneakers I usually wore to take out the trash. No makeup, Just a touch of lip balm and a ponytail I barely combed out. The goal wasn't to impress. The goal was to vanish. Blend into their expectations. Stay quiet, stay small, be the girl they'd written off a decade ago. Walking up the path, I could already feel my posture curling inward, my shoulders slumping without thinking. I knew that instinct too well. How to be invisible. How to speak in the tone that wouldn't offend, wouldn't threaten, wouldn't trigger the passive-aggressive sighs or those looks they shared when I said something that didn't fit. My mom opened the door before I knocked. She must have been watching. She smiled, or tried to. It barely moved her face. "You found us okay?" "As always," I said, giving a shrug. I didn't say that I had GPS or that I never forgot a single turn down these streets. I'd driven this route 1,000 times in my head, back when I lived in a dorm and still thought maybe I could fix things. "Well, come in," she said, stepping back. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and roasted chicken. She always cleaned before guests, even if the guest was the family disappointment. Grace was already in the kitchen, stirring something in a bowl like she was auditioning for a commercial. Her hair was perfect, her nails done in a soft blush pink. She wore one of those flowy button-down shirts that looked effortless but probably cost more than my hoodie. When she saw me, she smiled and said, "Wow, Lex, you look the same." I nodded. "So do you." Matthew was in the living room, scrolling on his phone. He didn't even look up. That was fine. He never really saw me anyway. Dinner was already mostly prepared, of course. My mom had always believed that timing was everything. She liked to have the food ready exactly 10 minutes after the guest arrived, just enough time to offer a drink and do the obligatory catch-up chatter. I accepted a glass of water even though I wasn't thirsty. I didn't want wine. Wine made me talk too much, loosen up too fast. I needed control tonight. We sat at the table, just the four of us. No extended family this time, no extra chairs. That would have meant more questions, and they didn't want questions, not with me there. I waited for it. The moment they always slipped in, subtle but unmistakable. It came right after Grace mentioned the fundraiser her sorority alumni group was organizing. My mom turned to me and said, "Do you still work at that little bank?" "Financial firm," I corrected softly. "But yes, still there." She nodded, clearly uninterested in the correction. "That's nice. Stability is important." That was her way of saying average. Not successful, not impressive. Just nice. And for once, I let it go. I smiled and nodded and didn't mention the recent promotion or the salary bump or the portfolio I managed with clients who wore tailored suits and had last names on buildings. I didn't tell them about the new apartment or the trip to Lisbon I'd been planning for spring. None of it would have landed. None of it was the Alexia they expected, the one they remembered. Grace asked if I was dating anyone, then immediately launched into a story about Matthew's coworker and her surprise proposal. My answer didn't matter, just the opening to pivot back to her life. I chewed a piece of overcooked chicken and kept my eyes on the pattern of the tablecloth. It was the same one from my childhood, still stained near the corner from a spill they never quite scrubbed out. After dinner, I offered to help with dishes. My mom declined, of course. "We've got it," she said, which meant she and Grace would rinse while Matthew sat on the couch. I lingered for a moment in the dining room, running a finger along the edge of the cabinet where my childhood drawings used to hang. No one asked me to stay longer. No one suggested a family photo or a cup of coffee or a walk down the block. The visit had served its purpose. I had come, I had behaved, and now they could tell themselves that everything was fine. As I walked back to my car, hoodie zipped tight and sneakers soft against the pavement, I didn't feel sad. Not exactly. Just tired. Tired in the kind of way that settles into your bones and stays there. They hadn't changed. I hadn't expected them to. But I had changed, even if they couldn't see it. And maybe that was the point. Grace was already in full performance mode when I stepped into the living room, perched perfectly on the edge of the couch like she was about to deliver a TED Talk instead of recount the details of her workday. Her voice filled the space with practiced confidence, every sentence landing like a line rehearsed to perfection. So the client had no idea what they wanted. She was saying, smiling like it was charming instead of frustrating. And I had to walk them through a whole rebrand strategy from scratch. I mean, their last logo looked like a third grader made it with Microsoft Paint. My mom let out a loud laugh, that high-pitched, breathy kind she reserved for Grace. "You are too much," she said, beaming. "What would they do without you?" My dad nodded along with a contented hum, his eyes on Grace like she'd solved some unsolvable equation. "That's the kind of leadership people notice," he said. "You've always had a way with people." I stood just inside the room, unnoticed at first. There was no pause in the conversation for me to sit, no glance to invite me to join. I wasn't part of the scene. I was background. A set piece in a stage play where the lead had already been cast, and the audience knew exactly who they'd come to see. Grace turned her head toward me, briefly, then back to our parents. Lex is here, she said with a faint smile, like she was acknowledging a passing breeze. She made brownies. Our mom looked over, smile still bright, but now a little strained. That was sweet of you, honey. We've got dessert covered, but maybe we'll try them later. Maybe. Not now. Not part of this moment. I walked slowly to the armchair in the corner, the one that had always been a little too low and made you sink into it awkwardly. The fabric had faded, and one of the armrests had a rip I remembered from when the cat used to claw it. I sat down without making a sound, legs crossed at the ankle, hands folded in my lap. I didn't say a word. Grace was in her element now, gesturing with her hands, describing campaign launches and market metrics and high-profile clients like it was just another Tuesday. We're pitching to a luxury skincare brand next week, she said, eyes sparkling. They flew us out to LA for the initial meeting. Very hush-hush, but it went really well. My mother gasped like Grace had just revealed national secrets. Los Angeles. That's incredible. Oh, you have to send me pictures when you go back. I already showed you some, Mom. Grace replied with a laugh, then tilted her head toward me again, this time with something closer to a smirk. Lex probably doesn't keep up with all the work stuff. It's not really her scene. She said it like a joke, light and teasing, but it landed sharp, like a paper cut. I didn't react. That was the trick, no flinching. If I gave her nothing, she couldn't twist it. The room felt warmer than it should have. The fireplace wasn't on, but I could feel the burn in my chest, a mix of silence and stale air. I looked at my mother, her gaze locked on Grace like she couldn't possibly look away. This was the daughter she brought up at garden clubs and holiday parties. The one with glossy photos on the fridge and invitations pinned to the bulletin board. I wasn't even in the group text anymore. Grace leaned back, one leg crossed elegantly over the other, perfectly manicured hands wrapped around a wine glass. She looked like she belonged in a magazine spread titled Success at 30. I, in my hoodie and jeans, looked like someone who'd stopped by to borrow something. They didn't ask about my job, or my life, or the last book I'd read. My presence was tolerated, not acknowledged. Grace filled every inch of the room with her voice and her glow, and I sat in the corner, listening to the applause. It wasn't envy, exactly. It was the weight of something old and familiar, the quiet realization that no matter how much I changed, this house would always remember me as the one who couldn't quite get it right. The plates were filled with overcooked chicken and bland green beans, but no one seemed to notice. They were too busy talking over one another, voices bouncing off the walls like it was a competition for who could sound the most content with their lives. I sat quietly at the end of the table, my fork nudging a piece of meat I had no interest in eating, just listening. That was always my role at family dinners. Observe, absorb, disappear. Halfway through the meal, my dad set down his fork, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and turned to me with that half-interested look he always gave when he was about to say something he thought was harmless. So, Alexia, he said, dragging my name out like it was foreign in his mouth. You still working as an assistant somewhere? Grace snorted into her wine glass before I could even answer. Oh my God, Dad, she said with a laugh, turning toward me with that smug expression I remembered from high school. She's been there, what, 8 years now? And still no promotion? That's got to be some kind of record. My mother chuckled softly, like it was all in good fun. Well, not everyone needs to climb the ladder, she said, patting my hand as if that was supposed to be comforting. Stability is important too. I looked at them, one by one, and I didn't say a word. I didn't mention the downtown office with the view that caught the sunrise every morning, or the team of analysts that answered to me, or the bonuses that dropped into my account with more zeros than Grace probably made in a year. I didn't say a thing about the meetings I ran, the boardrooms I led, or the new division I had personally built from scratch. Instead, I smiled faintly and took a sip of water. Let them believe what they wanted to believe. Let them picture me hunched behind someone else's desk, fetching coffee, answering phones, being overlooked. It was easier than explaining to people who had never listened what success actually looked like. Grace tossed her hair and started talking about her agency again, something about a big client and a campaign launch. My dad nodded, clearly more invested in her world than mine, and my mom started asking about flights to LA, already planning a visit that no one had invited her on yet. I kept my head down, chewing slowly, letting the silence settle around me like armor. They didn't know who I was anymore, and I had stopped trying to make them see. The city was quiet from up here, the kind of quiet that only makes sense when you're 20 stories above it all, glass of red wine in hand, and nothing but night air brushing across your face. I stood barefoot on the balcony, my apartment glowing softly behind me, warm lights spilling from the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed my living room like a magazine spread. The skyline stretched out in every direction, buildings lit like fireflies, and traffic moving below in smooth, indifferent lines. Up here, it was impossible to feel small. I had just dropped my bag by the door and slipped off my shoes when my phone buzzed. I ignored it for a few minutes, letting myself settle into the quiet, the kind that only comes after holding your breath too long. Dinner had drained something out of me, but it hadn't broken me. Not this time. Eventually, I picked up the phone and saw her name, Grace. I opened the message. I hope you're not too sad to be a loser. I'll send you a postcard from Miami. That was it. No punctuation, not even an emoji to soften it. Just pure grace. I stared at it for a moment, not angry, not surprised, not even hurt. I was too far beyond that. I pressed down on the screen until the little options appeared and hit delete without replying. The wine tasted better after that. Not sweeter, just sharper, more honest. I looked out over the city, this life I had built piece by piece, alone and steady, without applause, without family dinners or validation from people who never really saw me. I thought about my office, the one with the polished glass table and the strategic meetings that bore my name at the top of the agenda. I thought about my annual report with numbers that made headlines. I thought about the 2 new hires who had asked if I was the same Alexia from the industry keynote they'd watched online last year. Grace had no idea. None of them did. And I preferred it that way. The invitation came in the form of a voicemail, my mother's voice, soft, but with that deliberate lilt she used when she wanted something to seem more important than it was. We're having a little family gathering next Saturday, she said, almost sing-song. Just something casual, but we have a special announcement to make. It would mean a lot if you came. She didn't specify what kind of announcement, and I didn't ask. Maybe it was another one of Grace's promotions or a second house being purchased in Florida. I wasn't sure why I said yes, but I did. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I was just bored. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I didn't confirm, didn't respond to the RSVP my mom probably expected, didn't offer to bring anything. But on Saturday, just before 4, I stood in front of my mirror in a black Chanel dress that had been tailored to fall just above the knee. Simple enough to look understated, but with stitching so clean it spoke louder than any designer logo ever could. The fabric hugged me like it was made for my bones, and the heels I chose, Italian leather, black, with a single strap across the ankle, added just the right amount of height. My makeup was subtle but deliberate. Hair pulled back in a low, neat twist. Gold earrings, real gold, not plated. I parked a few houses down again, same as last time, old habits sticking like burrs. The front yard was already dotted with relatives I hadn't seen in years, people who still asked if I was still doing numbers or whatever it is you do. Inside, the dining room was crowded, the living room full of cousins and aunts and uncles with paper cups in their hands and polite, recycled laughter hanging in the air. My mother spotted me first. She blinked once, twice, like she wasn't sure if it was me, then smiled a little too quickly. "You came," she said, reaching out like she might kiss my cheek, but stopping just short. Her eyes flicked down to the dress, and I saw the shift in her expression. Barely there, but I noticed. I said I would. I answered, walking past her into the room. Grace was by the fireplace in a pale pink dress that looked like it had been picked out for a baby shower, all soft ruffles and fake modesty. She glanced at me and blinked too, then turned back to the cousin she'd been talking to with a smile I could have torn in half. Matthew was pouring himself a beer from the countertop cooler like he was at a backyard barbecue, instead of my parents' carefully orchestrated, intimate gathering. I took a glass of wine and found a spot near the staircase, where I could see everything but didn't have to talk. The dress did the talking anyway. I caught a few people glancing, eyebrows slightly raised, heads tilting, a couple of half-whispers. It wasn't the attention I wanted, but it was the reaction I expected. They didn't know how to place me anymore. About an hour in, my dad raised his glass and tapped it lightly with the side of a spoon. The room quieted with that slow wave of half-interest, half-curiosity. "Everyone," he said, looking around. "Thank you for being here. We're grateful for family." A glance at Grace, then back to the room. "And for being able to share moments like this with all of you." My mother stepped forward beside him, practically glowing. "We have a little news to share," she said, clasping her hands together. "Grace has been promoted to senior branding director. It's a big step, and we're just so proud." Applause followed, polite and predictable. Grace gave a small bow, humble brag smile in place, and leaned into my mother's shoulder like she was receiving an award. There were a few congratulatory shouts, a toast, someone clinking a cup against Matthew's. I took a long sip of wine and kept my eyes on the edge of the tablecloth, letting the moment pass over me like weather. No one asked what I'd been up to. No one brought up my name. The spotlight was exactly where they wanted it, and that was fine. They could have it. Grace looked at me as the clapping died down, her expression unreadable, but her chin tilted just slightly higher, like she thought she'd won something. I smiled back. Not wide, not forced, just enough. If only they knew. By the time dinner was served, the mood had already shifted into that performative cheer my family perfected over the years. The long dining table was covered with dishes no one really cared about: dry roast beef, limp asparagus, mashed potatoes that still had lumps. But the food was never the point. It was the show, the script, the roles we were all expected to play. I was seated between an uncle I barely remembered and a cousin who spent most of the night texting under the table. Grace sat across from me, radiant in a green wrap dress that tried too hard to look effortless. Her wine glass was already half empty, and she was glowing with the kind of self-satisfaction that practically hummed in the air around her. It happened just as everyone had taken a few bites, napkins barely unfolded in laps. My mother raised her glass like it was a reflex. "Everyone," she said, her voice bright and overly rehearsed. "I have a little announcement to make. Grace has just accepted an offer to become head of marketing at a new firm in Miami." A wave of applause followed. Chairs shifted. Forks clinked against plates. Someone let out a low whistle, and another relative raised a glass in Grace's direction. She soaked it in like sunlight, smiling and tilting her head just enough to look bashful while still inviting admiration. I reached for the bottle and quietly refilled my glass. "It's a big move," my dad added, raising his own glass. "A lot of responsibility. But if anyone can handle it, it's Grace." She looked directly at me then, like the entire announcement had been building to this moment. "Not everyone is destined to grow up," she said, the words sweet and poisonous, wrapped in a tone that pretended to be playful. I didn't answer. I didn't react. I just took another sip of wine and looked away. Let them have it. Let her preen in her crown of cardboard and glitter. Let the whole room toast to a title she could barely define. I wasn't going to compete. I wasn't going to explain. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me flinch. Some things are too small to fight. I don't know what changed in me at that moment. Maybe it was the way my mother clutched Grace's hand like she was announcing an engagement. Maybe it was the smug curl of Grace's lip when she leaned across the table to whisper something to Matthew, eyes flicking toward me like I was background noise. Or maybe it was just the wine pooling behind my ribs, making my pulse louder than the chatter around me. Whatever it was, I set my glass down and stood. The motion alone quieted the table. No fork scraped against porcelain. No cough to fill the silence. Just eyes, shifting toward me, unsure. I wasn't going to say anything. I began, my voice calm, almost too calm. Not because I'm embarrassed, but because it honestly didn't seem worth it. I looked around the room, meeting their eyes one by one, even the ones I hadn't spoken to in years. But since we're all celebrating success tonight, maybe it's fair to mention that I've been the chief financial officer of Del Mar Holdings for the past 3 years. No one moved. My father blinked slowly. My mother's expression flattened, as if she couldn't quite compute the words. Grace's face didn't change, frozen, locked, unreadable, but her hand gripped her wine glass just a little too tightly. "I lead a team of 40 people," I continued, "across 3 regions. I oversee budgets bigger than this entire house is worth, and last year my decisions brought in more profit than this family has seen in a decade." Still nothing. Just stunned, suspended silence, broken only by the tick of the wall clock behind my father's head. I didn't share this before because I knew it wouldn't matter here. You don't ask about my life, and when you do, it's usually to laugh at it. I've let you believe what you want, because arguing with ghosts gets exhausting. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and opened the message. "This," I said, holding the screen up for the room to see, "is the text Grace sent me after last week's dinner." I read it out loud, slowly, so every word sank deep. "I hope you're not too sad to be a loser. I'll send you a postcard from Miami." Someone at the far end of the table gasped. I lowered the phone and set it down beside my plate. "You talk about family, about loyalty, about how proud you are of each other. But I've sat at this table for years while you've belittled me, excluded me, and turned my silence into proof that I must not have anything worth saying." Grace shifted in her seat, but I didn't give her the chance to interrupt. "I'm not looking for applause. I don't need it. I built my life without any of you. But tonight, I'm not going to let my name be treated like a joke in my own family." No one knew where to look. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. My father stared down at his plate like it might tell him what to say. I sat down slowly, lifted my wine glass, and took one final sip. The silence didn't end. It just stretched. Heavy, unavoidable. And for the first time in years, I didn't shrink to fit inside it. It was a few days later, late afternoon, and I was sitting alone in a quiet cafe tucked between 2 office buildings, the kind of place where the light filtered in through streaked windows and the espresso machine hissed like it was trying to keep a secret. I hadn't spoken to anyone from the party since that night, and I wasn't expecting to. My phone had been strangely quiet, and honestly, I welcomed it. I was halfway through a cappuccino, flipping through some notes on my tablet, when I heard someone clear their throat beside my table. I looked up, and for a second, I didn't recognize him. Taller now, broader shoulders, but still with the same uncertain eyes and awkward posture. "Liam," he said, offering a tentative smile. "You probably don't remember me." I did. Vaguely. He was the shy one at family barbecues, the cousin who never spoke unless someone asked him a direct question, the boy who always kept to the edge of the yard with a book while the rest of us played tag. "I remember," I said, motioning for him to sit. "From Aunt Evelyn's side, right?" He nodded, brushing invisible dust from his pants before taking the seat across from me. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said, voice low. "I saw you walk in and, well, after the other night, I figured maybe you deserved to know." I tilted my head, unsure where he was going, but I let him talk. "I work at Northbridge," he said. "I'm on the data side. Not glamorous, but I've been there for 5 years. It's solid." He paused, then looked straight at me. "That job Grace announced at dinner, the one in Miami, it doesn't exist. At least not for her." I didn't say anything, just stared, let the words hang there between us. "She applied," Liam continued. "A couple months ago. I saw her name on the internal shortlist. Everyone did. There was buzz, mostly because her resume looked off, a little padded. And then there was the interview." He looked almost embarrassed telling me, like he was the one who had failed. "It didn't go well. Her presentation was all aesthetics, no substance. She couldn't answer basic questions about budget forecasting or campaign strategy. The hiring manager said it felt like she was winging it." Her name was removed from the candidate list 2 days later. I blinked, still silent. My stomach didn't twist. My heart didn't race. It was something colder than that, something duller. "They removed her from the database," Liam said. "Full exclusion. She can't apply again for 18 months. It's policy. And the worst part." He shifted in his seat, looking down at his hands. "Your parents know. I overheard a conversation. Your dad called in a favor after the rejection, tried to see if they'd reconsider. He knew she didn't get it." I nodded slowly, processing it. It explained the carefully worded announcement, the lack of specifics, the sudden need for celebration, as if overcompensating for something they were terrified might slip. Liam looked up again, apologetic. "I just thought, you should hear it from someone. You didn't deserve the way she talked to you, or the way they let her." I smiled faintly, not out of joy, but something else, acknowledgement. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. He nodded, stood up, and left quietly, like he always did. I sat there for a long time after that, watching the last lights stretch across the street, casting long shadows through the glass. The lie wasn't what surprised me. What hit deeper was how easy it had been for them to hold it together, to raise their glasses and toast her with full knowledge of the truth. To watch me sit there in silence while they applauded something they all knew had already crumbled. And still, I said nothing. Liam had stayed just long enough to finish his coffee before dropping it, almost casually, like it was an afterthought. "You should apply for that position," he said, pushing his empty cup aside. "We still haven't filled it. Honestly, we need someone real. A professional. Not whatever that was." I raised an eyebrow, but he wasn't joking. "You'd walk in with a resume that actually makes sense," he added. "And I know our CFO. If I vouch for you, it'll move fast. We're desperate for competence." There was something refreshingly blunt about how he said it. No flattery, no false urgency, just a quiet truth. So I said yes. Not because I needed the job, not because I needed the title, but because for the first time in a long while, I felt like showing them all exactly who I was without saying a word. The application was easy. A streamlined portal, a quick upload, a short message addressed to a name I already recognized from a networking event last year. No interview prep, no rehearsed lines. Just a portfolio, credentials, and a timeline of actual results that couldn't be spun or softened. 3 years as CFO, regional expansion, restructured systems that saved over $10 million in operating costs, 40 direct reports, a consistent track record of growth. Metrics, not metaphors. A week later, the offer came in, twice the starting salary Grace had boasted about, with bonuses that made even my current package look tame. I read the email twice, just to make sure I wasn't missing anything, then forwarded it to Liam with a simple, "Looks like I'll see you around." That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't post. I didn't tell anyone. I poured a glass of wine, sat out on the balcony, and watched the lights blink across the skyline like quiet applause. Grace, meanwhile, chose her own kind of announcement. A photo posted to her Instagram, one of those heavily filtered shots with fake bokeh and a caption in cursive font. "Sometimes you choose creativity over career." And that's okay. Below it, the comments rolled in. Friends with flower emojis. Some old classmates saying they admired her brave leap. And then there were my parents, both commenting with hearts. Red, pink, purple. A rainbow of devotion. She was still pretending, and they were still pretending with her. And I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel smug. I just felt done. That was the real victory. I didn't call ahead. I didn't text or give any kind of warning. I just drove out to the old house, the one with the cracked steps and the ivy that never quite took hold no matter how many times my mother insisted it would fill out next spring. It was late afternoon when I pulled into the driveway, the sun catching on the front windows just enough to remind me of how many years I'd spent watching the world through them, wondering when I'd finally feel seen. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She looked smaller somehow, tired in a way she hadn't allowed herself to appear before, her sweater hanging a little looser at the shoulders, her hair unbrushed at the crown. Her eyes didn't widen in surprise. It was more like resignation. She stepped aside without speaking. I walked in and stood in the entryway, letting the silence fill the space between us. She closed the door gently behind me, like the sound might trigger something she couldn't handle. We stood there, facing each other, the quiet growing thick enough to hold weight. "You were cruel," she said finally, voice low, trembling under the surface but held together by habit. "At dinner, you humiliated your sister." I didn't flinch. "I was honest," I said. "You just weren't ready to hear it." She looked away, arms folding across her chest like armor. "You don't understand what it's like to watch your children turn on each other." "No," I said. "But I understand what it's like to sit at this table for years and be told, through words, through silence, that I wasn't enough, that I was difficult, that I wasn't Grace." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't interrupt. I took a step forward, just enough to meet her eyes fully. "I know she never got the job. I know she failed the interview. I know she was removed from consideration and that you both knew before you raised your glasses and toasted her fake triumph." She didn't deny it. She didn't speak. That told me everything. "I don't need an apology," I said. "I'm not here for that. I'm not here to explain or prove anything anymore. I just wanted to see you, and I wanted you to see me." I paused, letting that settle in. Her face was unreadable, but something in her eyes flickered. Shame, maybe, or just exhaustion. Before I turned to leave, I reached for the door and glanced back one last time. "I now hold the position that your favorite couldn't get." And then I walked out, without waiting for a response. The apartment feels different now, not because the furniture has changed or because I finally bought the rug I kept putting off, but because of the silence. It's not the kind of silence that used to weigh on me after phone calls that ended too quickly or dinners where I said too little. It's the kind of silence that fills a room without pressing against your chest. The kind that feels earned. Chosen. I start my mornings earlier now. Coffee, emails, sometimes a run if the weather's good. At work, people knock before entering my office. They listen when I speak. They ask for my input because it matters. There's no need to prove anything. No desperate scramble to remind the room I belong there. I belong. And they know it. Liam and I have found a rhythm. It's quiet, thoughtful, easy in a way that makes sense without explanation. He doesn't fill the spaces between my words with assumptions. He listens. He shows up without trying to fix me. We don't talk much about family, but when we do, it's honest. He never makes me feel like I have to make excuses for why things are the way they are. As for my family, there's space between us now. Not absence, not anger. Just space. A space I no longer feel obligated to close. They exist on the edge of my life, and I've stopped reaching. Stopped shrinking. Stopped trying to bend myself into something they'd find easier to love. And that's not defeat. It's freedom. It's the freedom to walk into a room without bracing for impact. To wear what I want, say what I think, leave when I've had enough. To love who I want, including myself, especially myself, without apology. So that's where I am now. No grand reconciliation. No dramatic endings. Just a quiet life built on truth, independence, and the decision to stop waiting for someone else to hand me peace. Thanks for listening to my story. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever reached that point where walking away felt more like strength than surrender? What would you have done in my place?